Welcome, everyone. It is 7 p.m. on Wednesday, June 21st. We will call to order the regular meeting of Board of Trustees of the Meridian Library District. Sorry. Before we begin on the meeting agenda, Nick, I did have a question for you. Item number 8 on our regular agenda tonight, the resource coordinator job description. I did not see it in the packet. Do you?
Okay.
So I don't know if I missed it, if anybody else saw it. I saw the other 3, but if we did not have it available.
We will advise then to go ahead and table that one
Okay.
when we get to it, and we will put it in next month.
Next time. Okay, thank you. All right, returning then to our annual meeting. It is June, which is the time for our annual meeting per our bylaws. We will begin with our new trustee oath of office. Destiny Hart and Josh Cummings won election on May 16th and will be sworn in accordance with Idaho Code 33-2715, having been duly elected by the citizens of Meridian. The newly elected library trustees shall take the oath of office as outlined in Idaho Code 59401. Before any officer elected or appointed to fill any office created by the laws of the state of Idaho enters upon the duties of his or her office, he or she must take and subscribe an oath to be known as the official oath, which is as follows. I will read it at the conclusion. Say, I do. I do solemnly swear that, or affirm as the case may be, that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Idaho, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of library's trustee according to the best of my ability. I do.
I do.
Congratulations, Destiny Hart. Congratulations, Josh Cummings. Thank you. And I do have the respective documents for you to sign as well, which is the same oath in writing. We will then move on to item number 2 on our agenda, officer election. Again, being this being our annual business meeting. Thank you. We do need to elect our officers per our bylaws. The board may, put it in the wrong spot. Per our bylaws, the board shall elect a chair, may elect a vice chair, and shall appoint a treasurer. The term of each of those offices is 1 year. Our bylaws further state that chair and vice chair must be members of the board having served at least 1 year, however, may be waived in the event no current members have served 1 year. Our current officers, myself as chair, Jeff Kohler as vice chair, and Laura Knutson as treasurer, have all met that requirement. Josh and Destiny, having been appointed initially last August and elected in May, have not yet reached that 1 year mark. I would entertain a motion for nomination of officers. We can do them as a slate or individually.
I would move to nominate Megan Larson as board chair and Laura Knutson as treasurer.
Thank you, Jeff.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Madam Chair,
Josh?
I move that Jeff Kohler be considered as the vice chair for the 1 year.
Thank you, Josh.
I second.
Thank you, Laura. We have a nomination for Jeff Kohler as vice chair. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your service. That brings us to item number 3. Also, as part of our annual business, we conduct a review of our bylaws and our trustee job description. The bylaws provided in your packet and posted on our website, and the trustee job description outlining the essential functions that we perform as trustees. At this time, we would entertain any discussion of revisions to those items. We have the opportunity to make revisions, but are not required to. Any comments from the board? Go ahead, Josh.
After reviewing the library trustee job descriptions, I move that we approve them as published.
Thank you, Josh. We have a motion to approve the existing bylaws and trustee job description.
I second.
Thank you, Laura. Further comment? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number.
Megan, We do have it listed as 2 action items. We might want to,
Do them separately?
Yeah.
All right. Josh, would you entertain a friendly
Yeah.
motion to amend to approve the bylaws?
So amended.
Laura, would you accept that?
Yes.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the bylaws. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item 3B, the trustee job description.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Laura.
after reviewing the trustee job description, I move that we accept it as written.
Thank you, Laura.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. Further comment? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 4 on our annual meeting business, and that is the establishing the regular meeting schedule for the coming year. The board has met on the third Wednesday of each month at 7 p.m. And provided in our packet are those meeting dates covering those third Wednesdays. We can, of course, schedule special meetings as needed to accomplish our business, but these are the regularly scheduled meetings. If approved, this calendar would be posted for the public to notify them of the meeting dates. Additionally, should we find that such a meeting was not required to conduct business, we could cancel a regular meeting if appropriate to do so. Are there any concerns with the meeting schedule? Third Wednesday not working for any of the trustees? Or a motion to approve the schedule?
I move that we approve the schedule and remain on the third Wednesdays.
Thank you, Jeff.
I second.
Thank you, Laura. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 1 on our regular meeting business, public comment. Tricia has confirmed for me that no one has signed in for public comment. Of course, the trustees welcome written comments at any time from members of the public. They are always able to submit those through the comment form on our website. Moving on to item number 2, the consent agenda. We have in our packets the regular meeting minutes from May 17th. Consent items are routine business approved or considered as one item without discussion. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Destiny.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Second? Or is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Laura. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 3, our financial report. A 49 pages this time, included in our packets. We also had some written comments from Emma in the departmental reports. Additional items to add?
No, thank you.
Additional comments from Laura or any questions from any of the trustees? All right. Hearing none, we have 2 action items before us. The first is the approval of the financial reports for April of 2023. I would entertain a motion.
I will move that we approve the financial reports of April 2023.
Thank you, Jeff.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. Further comment? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The second action item under financials, item number 3, is the disbursement approvals. This is the bulk of our report. We have all of the disbursements from the library district listed in detail there for the trustees' review. Any questions on those items for Emma? Or a motion to approve?
I move that we approve this disbursement listed in the board packet.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Josh. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 4, the Orchard Park Capital Expenditure Memorandum. This item was included in your packets. Item number 4. Nick, do you have additional comments or explanation? Might be in order.
Essentially, the capital project for Orchard Park had some caps set. We were able to stay under budget overall, but the one item that had a cap ran into some issues with supply and labor and all the tenant improvement challenges that we had over the last year and a half. So that portion went over, but overall we were still under.
Nick, I think as the trustees may recall, with the coordination between the contractor for the core and shell and the contractor for the tenant improvements, we ran into some significant, well, not significant, but we ran into some issues with those things mashing up.
There were a few significant
Travis's beard
challenges.
got grayer as time went on. Some challenges between coordinating those two things. So I think I'm pleased that the project came in within the budget established overall and not particularly surprised given those issues that we had a little bit of overage. Questions?
Madam Chair, so
Go ahead, Jeff.
just so I can understand and explain it to my neighbors, so we exceeded the not to exceed, but we were still under budget?
So overall, we were under the established budget for Orchard Park, but the do not exceed for for CM in
Oh, for
particular
just that piece.
for that piece of the
Okay.
project. So one piece of the puzzle was a little over, but overall the project was under the projected
So the 21K overage
for
would still be
CM.
paid, but it will still,
Correct.
we won't go over the whole budget,
Correct.
even after we pay that.
Correct.
Thank you.
This is just a change to
piece.
modify the piece that had been set in January of 22.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Nick, does this represent the last of what we owe aside from startup costs for operating the new branch?
Substantially, yes. Overall, no. We are still waiting on some supplies that have been severely backordered to fully close out the improvements. Once those are completed, then we will be able to do final billing on a few of the items.
Okay.
But by and large, we're mostly closed out on Orchard.
Sure.
Go ahead, Josh.
Just comment that the incremental change of going over, it looks like to be less than 1% of the overall. And that's a lot better than a lot of other military projects when it comes to not to exceed numbers. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with the TI management, and the order seemed quite reasonable in nature.
Thanks, Josh.
That I move that we approve the Orchard Park capital expenditure memorandum.
A second?
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Laura. Further comment? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, that brings us to the most fun part of our agenda tonight. We have the FY22 audit presentation. This is an action item for the board tonight, and we have David Hegstrom here from Harris CPAs. Yes, if you talk into the mic. Sorry, one more thing. The draft financial statements were included in your packets.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. My name is David Hagstrom. I'm a licensed certified public accountant in the state of Idaho in good standing and a partner with the firm of Harris CPAs. This evening, I would like to present the independent auditor's report and the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting on compliance and other matters based on the audited financial statements performed in accordance with government auditing standards. I'll present this in a somewhat abbreviated form. However, it won't feel that way, I promise. To the Board of Trustees, we have audited the financial statements of Meridian Library District as of and for the year ended September 30th, 2022, and the related notes to the financial statements, which collectively comprise Meridian Library District's basic financial statements as listed in the table of contents. In our opinion, the accompanying financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of Meridian Library District as of September 30th, 2022, and the changes in its financial position and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. We conducted our audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America and the standards applicable to the financial audits contained in government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller of the United States. We are required to be independent of Meridian Library District and to meet other ethical responsibilities in accordance with relevant ethical requirements related to our audit. We believe that our audit evidence we have obtained is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. Meridian Library District's management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America, and for the design, implementation, and maintenance of internal control relevant to the preparation and fair presentation of financial statements that are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. In preparing financial statements, management is required to evaluate whether there are conditions or events considered in the aggregate that raise substantial doubt about Meridian Library District's ability to continue as a going concern for 12 months beyond the financial statement date, including any currently known information that may raise substantial doubt shortly thereafter. Our objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, and to issue an auditor's report that includes our opinion. Reasonable assurance is a high level of assurance, but is not absolute, and therefore is not a guarantee that an audit conducted in accordance with GAS will always detect a material misstatement when it exists. The risk of not detecting a material misstatement resulting from fraud is higher than one from resulting from error, as fraud may involve collusion, forgery, intentional omissions, misrepresentations, or the override of internal control. Misstatements are considered material if there's a substantial likelihood that individually or in the aggregate, they would influence the judgment made by a reasonable user based on the financial statements. In performing an audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism throughout the audit. Identify and assess the risk of material misstatement of the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error, and design and perform audit procedures responsive to those risks. Such procedures include examining, on a test basis, evidence regarding the amounts and disclosures of the financial statements. Obtain an understanding of internal control relevant to the audit in order to design audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of Meridian Library District's internal control. Accordingly, no such opinion is expressed. Evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies and the reasonableness of significant accounting estimates made by management, as well as evaluate the overall presentation of the financial statements. Conclude whether, in our judgment, there are conditions or events considered in the aggregate that raise substantial doubt about Meridian Library District's ability to continue as a going concern for a reasonable period of time. We are required to communicate with those charged with governance regarding, among other matters, the planned scope and timing of the audit, significant accounting findings, and certain internal control related matters that we identified during the audit. Management has admitted management discussion and analysis that accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America are required to be presented to supplement the basic financial statements. Such missing information, although not part of the financial statements, is required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, who considers it to be an essential part of the financial reporting for placing the basic financial statements in appropriate operational, economic, or historical context. Our opinions on the basic financial statement is not affected by this missing information. Our audit was conducted for the purpose of forming an opinion and on the financial statements that collectively comprise Meridian Library District's basic financial statements. The supplementary information presented for the purpose of additional analysis are not a required part of the basic financial statements as required by Title II of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, Part 20, Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards. The supplementary information are the responsibility of management and was derived from and relates directly to the underlying accounting and other records used to prepare the basic financial statements. Such information has been subjected to the auditing procedures applied in the audit of the basic financial statements and certain additional procedures, including comparing and reconciling such information directly to the underlying accounting and other records used to prepare the basic financial statements, or to the basic financial statements themselves, and other additional procedures in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America. In our opinion, this information is fairly stated in all material respects in relation to the basic financial statements as a whole. In accordance with government auditing standards, we have also issued our report dated March 9th, 2023, on our consideration of Meridian Library District's internal control over financial reporting and on our tests of its compliance with certain provisions, laws, regulations, contracts, grant agreements, and other matters. The purpose of that report is solely to describe the scope of our testing of internal control over financial reporting and compliance, and the results of that testing, and not to provide an opinion on the effectiveness of the internal control over financial reporting or on compliance. That report is an integral part of the audit performed in accordance with government auditing standards in considering Meridian Library District's internal control over financial reporting and compliance. Now, that was the first report. I do promise the subsequent report is significantly smaller. So reading appropriate excerpts from the independent auditor's report on internal control. It's the last report in the packet that you received. But excerpt from the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters based on an audit of financial statements performed in accordance with government auditing standards. In planning and performing our audit of the financial statements, we considered Meridian Library District's internal control over financial reporting to determine the audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances for the purpose of expressing our opinions on the financial statements, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of Meridian Library District's internal control. Accordingly, we do not express opinion on the effectiveness of the district's internal control. A deficiency in internal control exists when the design or operation of a control does not allow management or employees in the normal course of performing their assigned functions to prevent or detect and correct misstatements on a timely basis. A material weakness is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control such that there is a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the entity's financial statements will not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. A significant deficiency is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control that is less severe in material weakness, yet important enough to merit attention by those charged with governance. Our consideration of internal control was for the limited purpose described in the preceding paragraph and was not designed to identify all deficiencies in internal control that might be material. Our consideration of internal control was for the limited purpose described in the preceding paragraph and was not designed to identify all deficiencies in internal control that might be material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, and therefore material weaknesses or significant deficiencies may exist that were not identified. However, material weaknesses may exist that have not been identified. As part of obtaining reasonable assurance about Meridian Library District's financial statements are free of material misstatements, we perform tests of its compliance with certain provisions of law, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements. Non-compliance with which could have a direct and material effect on the determination of the financial statement amounts. However, providing an opinion on compliance with those provisions was not an objective of our audit, and accordingly, we do not express such an opinion. The results of our test disclose no instances of non-compliance or other matters that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. The purpose of this report is solely to describe the scope of our testing of internal control and compliance and the results of that testing, and not to provide an opinion on the effectiveness of the entity's internal control or on compliance. Again, this report is an integral part of the audit performed in accordance with government auditing standards and considering the entity's internal control and compliance. Accordingly, this communication is not suitable for any other purpose. We made it, everybody. At this time, if you have any questions, please be happy to answer those.
Thank you for the caveat, the alibis, and get out of jail free cards there. In reviewing this, there was one section that I had questions about on page 23, the pension plan. With some of the amounts, just say, I'm not an accountant or CPA, obviously, but when I see numbers in parentheses, that's generally a bad thing, right? Or that's a, hey, we're going to be upside down in this capacity. Is this specific to us, or is this overall with Percy, which I really, as our board, we have no purview or concerns about Percy's financial problems. We only care about our former employees that are, receiving their retirement, that sort of thing. Are those numbers because it looks like it goes from 300-ish, and then 140, and then back to 450. So it's like are they planning on a lot of people passing away in that particular year or something? What generates those numbers? And am I even reading those correctly?
Thank you, Josh. This is directly from Percy and the reports obtained from the audited financial statements for Percy. The fluctuations that you see are based on actuarial tables by specialists performed for the audit of the Percy retirement program.
Okay, so this is nothing that I need to lose sleep over or think that there's going to be squads in 2025 going around. Well,
On the record, I don't know of death squads in 2025.
okay, fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
Thanks, Josh. I do know that my understanding is for all of the Percy entities, I think there are 800 of them in the state. There's quite a few. And Percy calculates these numbers as each entity's share and then pushes out that information for each entity to include in their financial statement. So
Yeah, these are on a proportionate share basis. Each organization that participates in Percy is then, again, we obtained that issued audit report of the Percy program and the allocated amount from Meridian Library District is disclosed in footnotes.
So for a budgetary perspective, though, Percy's not going to come to MLD and say, hey, because of the numbers in this big deficit, we're going to change your premiums or anything like that, or your buy-in. Or is that something
That would be a discussion with Percy.
Madam Chair,
So,
can I answer?
please.
Okay. Percy is actually very flush with their overall balance. A little while, but they had something around like 15 billion in assets for the Percy Retirement Fund, and they actually lowered rates recently that go into effect next month, I believe, for employers down from 11.96% to like 11.25%. I believe 11.5, 10%. Okay, so they've actually lowered our employment out cost for that service or for that benefit.
Yeah, the Percy's, the rates are set by the legislature, so every Percy entity pays the same rates, and they have a requirement that their asset,
it's
their
based on-
portfolio be amortized over 25 years, so they have to have on hand what they need to pay out.
And it's also based on portfolio performance, actuarial tables, and as Chairperson Larson described, the legislature setting those required funding amounts.
So,
Great, thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. All right, additional questions?
Madam Chair. David, thanks for coming tonight. And this may not be part of the audit, but just out of curiosity, so our money, our cash is mostly invested in the state investment fund. And in light of in light of the turmoil in the banking system this spring, are there any concerns about those monies, or is that in the purview of your audit? I mean, I don't think there would be, but like Josh, I'm not a CPA.
It may be a discussion to be had amongst the trustees about cash management and looking at the insured limits. However, I'm not, as you pointed out, I do not provide investment
Right.
advice
I don't
in
mean
any
that.
regard.
Just
So
the risk, is there a risk there?
the risk would be, I mean, what you're discussing is bank defaults and not being insured up to a certain
Mhm.
limit. Which I think would maybe be a discussion for
Internal
trustees
accounting.
and internal
Okay.
discussion.
Thank you.
Additional questions? All right, I would entertain a motion to accept the fiscal year 2022 audit.
I move that we accept the 2022 audit.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jeff. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, and we'll see you next year.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All righty, that brings us to item number 6 on our agenda, the financial structure presentation from Emma.
Hi, okay, I think I know almost everybody in this room, maybe just one or two. So my name is Emma, and I am the accounting and finance manager here at the Meridian Library District. And today I want to go through the financial structure of the district regarding making purchases and buying things and how money goes out the door to vendors for purchases made. So I want to give some high-level context and then some detailed context. So the first thing we're going to do is just go through the 8 reports that I give to the board every month and what those mean and what is in those reports and why they are given. And then we're going to look at the financial structure of vendor payments and what that actually means for the library and how money filters through. Specifically, the money that filters through is listed on 3 board reports every month, the disbursement reports that were mentioned earlier. That's the bill listing, the electronic bill payment list, and the credit card detail. So after each little spiel on the different report types and how money flows through, we'll pause for questions so we can keep everything crispy and clear and everyone's on the same page. So every single month, there are 8 reports presented to the board in the board financial package. It can be very lengthy, and I appreciate the board taking the time to review sometimes what is maybe longer than some of the books we have out on the shelves. So the first thing that is presented every month is a bill payment list. This is a list of payments that were sent out. Think of this as the actual check going out the door. The second report that is presented monthly is the bill listing. This is a list of invoices that have been approved for payment to be sent out. The third thing is the electronic bill payment list. These are bills that are paid directly via vendor direct debit, and this is something we do as minimally as possible. The fourth report is the credit card detail. This shows all of the bills paid via credit card through the month of the report. The fifth report that the board reviews every month are the budget to actual details. This is a budget spend summary report year to date for each budget line item account in the general ledger. The sixth report is the budget to actual summary report. This is a budget to actual report summarized based on our big budget categories. We have been looking at those budget categories over the last 3 months in the financial reports, operations, personnel, collections. So that report really summarizes from a high level where the library is at with budget to actuals. The seventh report that is sent to the board is a statement of activity. That's very similar to an income statement, shows your total revenue, money in, shows your total money out, and then hopefully what's left over. And the last and final report that is sent to the board monthly is the statement of financial position. That is very similar to a balance sheet, shows your assets, the cash, what accounts that money is sitting in, your equipment, other things you have on your books, and then your liabilities and owner's equity and other things. So last month, Mr. Ritter from the ICFL came and talked about financial responsibility and the board's part of that and their part of setting our policies and then monitoring our finances. So here at MLD, the Board of Trustees approves all purchases over $50,000. So this isn't like $50,000 of books purchased. This is like a actual single item for $50,000, a large contract, thinking of construction contracts, furniture purchases, you know, a large service contract, etc. MLD follows all applicable purchasing and procurement laws set by the legislature and in Idaho statute, and we do stay current and take training on that to make sure that we are compliant. The director of the library is authorized by Meridian Library District's financial policy to expend funds within the board approved budget. And the director takes that one step further and approves all purchases over $10,000 before they happen. And so the point of that is not only to prevent budget overrun, but to keep our large purchases aligned with the strategic goals of the district and to keep everything moving seamlessly in the same direction. And then the director is authorized to delegate purchasing responsibility down to his staff. Director Grove does not want to be purchasing sticky notes for the entire library district. So he does delegate purchasing authority down to staff who can go ahead and make purchases to do their job and keep things going. So there are two ways at the library for staff to purchase goods and services. One is through a vendor direct bill, which would be paid by a check, and then second with a credit card. The library uses Divvy for our credit cards. So what happens is employees procure goods but when they have been given that purchasing authority, and they submit a payment to the system we use, which is bill.com. Bill.com is a cloud-based electronic platform that gives us a lot of visibility and a really good audit trail. So employees will submit their expenses, their invoices to bill.com. Those then are reviewed by at least 2 people. So every single invoice that comes through for payment is reviewed by the accounting and finance manager, and then a secondary admin manager. That could be the director himself, the assistant director, the district support services manager, HR manager, etc. But at least 2 sets of eyes are on every single bill that gets paid through bill.com at the district. Additionally, the director reviews all invoices that are over $5,000 before payment is made. So that is just keeping in line with making sure everyone is in the loop and that we are doing our due diligence at every step along the way. The director releases all expenditures for payment. So once invoices are entered, no one can release the payment except the director. In other words, he's the only one who has the authority to push the button. So no one else can go ahead and do that. And then finally, the Board of Trustees reviews those line item expenses every single month in the board packet in the bill listing report. And so that is what happens on the back end of MLD to feed everything into that bill listing report, which then you guys are the last set of eyes and finalize. So any questions on that process or any additional comments from Director Grove?
I'd like to just expand on one thing so that the trustees have a little bit more knowledge of how staff use the back end. Predominantly, staff use their credit cards through Divvy to make purchases. Most of those purchases, most day-to-day operational purchases that staff make are through that process. That is a system that we use that allows us to set budget limits for each person and each budget line. And so we can allocate a set amount for an individual, and then their supervisor reviews the purchase and the receipt and make sure that it is allocated to the proper budget line. And then we also go through and check that as well. So we have a lot of checks and balances throughout the entire system. And it allows us to monitor and track the budget lines in real time, and allows us to only set aside a certain amount of a budget per person or per time. So we might only release, let's say, 30% of our program's budget to staff at the outset of the fiscal year, and then we'll reallocate another 30%, a third of the way through the year, and so on. So we don't necessarily provide the entire budget to staff at one time in most circumstances. And those are shared budgets as well. So you can have multiple people in those budgets, and it gives us a lot of back-end flexibility and accountability.
Go ahead, Laura.
Madam Chair, Nick, what happens in a situation where a user would exceed their limit and they have to make a purchase?
It depends on a couple of factors. If their card has been given $1,000 overall, they'll be able to make the purchase, even if their account budget for that item or for programs they had $200 for supplies, they had $800, but they spent $400 on program. The purchase would still go through, but we would have to change that on the back end. But if they were to make a purchase of $1,200, it would not go through because they do not have that much allocated to their card overall.
Emma, can you speak please to the kind of the schedule aspect of it? So I'm thinking that staff can put their invoices into bill.com kind of as received as things happen. But for Nick's piece in that, is he doing it? Do you do check runs twice a month, or does he do it?
Absolutely. So the bill listing report and everything that I just went through is really related to invoices that run through bill.com before payment. And those things are mostly recurring bills, internet bills, construction bills, those types of things. They are not necessarily employees going out and doing their own procurements. Those sort of procurements do run through the Divvy card, which we will discuss next. We pay bills once a month during the first week of the month. We will run additional check runs if needed, but for the most part, we pay all of the bills during the first week of the month.
If Director Grove were to be on vacation in the first week of the month, would it wait for him to return? Is he delegating authority to somebody else? Or
We have not crossed that bridge yet. He's not allowed to take vacation.
this is not a sustainable model. All right, we'll come back to that. All right, other questions? Go ahead,
Madam
Josh.
Chair. Nick, I love the idea and implementation of the system as far as, because it's essentially centralized control and decentralized execution at point of purchase, which is generally an effective and efficient way of doing business. One thing that it kind of parallels with the way the military operated, and I kind of want to ask kind of a broad cultural approach to finances amongst employees of the district. In the military, and I'll just kind of compare and contrast. In the military, toward the end of the fiscal year, it was use it or lose it time. So there was a lot of frivolous spending, or not frivolous, but fallout monies, and like, hey, if we don't use it this year, we're not going to get it next year, so let's burn through this money. And in my estimation, it was generally wasteful and not the best financial stewardship. And it sounds like that is not the case in this district, I would hazard guess. So like, as you're doing this 30% release of budget, if they haven't used it, are you still piling on the capital, or are you just kind of holding it in reserve and then kind of on an as-need, quarterly kind of basis?
Yeah, so the budget is not, we don't say, okay, we're this far into the year, so we're going to release this much more funds. If the budget line is at, let's say, 10% spent and we're 40% of the way through the year, we're not going to just automatically release up to 40% of the budget necessarily. But we will be checking in with the staff that have been allocated those funds and ask what's going on, why are we under or why are we over where we're at for this point in the fiscal year. And so we try and have those routine touch points to make sure that we're not over budget, under budget significantly. And also when we get to this time of year, if we do have large overages or underages, we can then start looking at if we need to do any what's the reallocation to do the budget in August, and we do that every August with the passage of the next fiscal year, but to realign the current fiscal year if there's significant changes that need to be made.
So is there any incentivization, I guess, for staying under budget at a department level or lower? Or any recognition? Maybe that's something in-house we could, do.
I mean, we don't have a ton of space, so
Yeah.
there's not a lot of ability to go wild. We usually have to encourage staff to make sure that they're purchasing what we've outlined them to purchase. We don't, in my almost 12 years being here, that has not been a problem. It is typically looking ahead to spend any unused monies to purchase something that would be purchased in the next fiscal year to offset the need to purchase it in the next fiscal year. But it's not frivolous in that sense. It's just trying to
It's leaning forward to anticipated needs.
to free up those funds to,
Okay.
As our HVAC gets older in this building, we,
Yeah.
are trying to pinch pennies where we can to make sure that,
Yep.
I don't have wood,
Yep,
but
nope,
when
I
that
get it, I
happens,
get it.
that we're ready to address it.
And one question for Emma, are you I know you are the finance manager. Do you have a staff of accountants or helpers, or is it just you?
It's just me.
I was kind of thinking that was the case. And just for the public to know, I may have mentioned your name as a point of contact if members of the public had specific budget questions that were beyond my scope, which doesn't go very far. So I apologize in advance for any phone calls you may be fielding from members of the public, but thank you for the work you're doing.
Just to append on to what Nick was saying, as I recall, towards the end of last fiscal year, we advanced the purchase of some technology items, some computers, and so we had budget funds available, and the advantage to that, of course, is when we're setting our budget, setting our levy rate on the community. If we can keep that next year's budget down, that I think is helpful, right? Those in the current year, those funds have already been levied. So if we can advance some purchases from the next year, that helps us, contributes to keeping our levy under control.
Madam Chair, additionally with that, anything that we can purchase in a current fiscal year not only frees up the need to buy it in the next fiscal year, but it also allows us to look while we're in this capital project phase to be able to put money into capital projects, either for repair and replacement, which carries over, or into the capital line for the next fiscal year if it's before the approval of the budget.
And it locks in pricing pre-inflationary, because next year ain't getting any cheaper.
Other comments? All right, carry on, Emma.
Okay, thank you. So, we talked about the policy regulations that we have in place, and then some additional steps that we take internally to keep our eyes on purchases. And we went through how vendor payments can go out via bill.com. And we also hit already a little bit on how money can go out through Divvy. So I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly because Director Grove thankfully already covered most of my bullet points. But Divvy is a wonderful platform. It is not only a purchasing card payable platform, but it is a budgeting platform. And so that allows us to have a lot of additional fiscal diligence while giving staff the autonomy to do their jobs and continue without getting bottlenecked into a purchasing freeze. So it's really helpful for us, and our staff seem to do really well with it. Everyone here at the district is extremely fiscally diligent and really watches their spending. So we don't have any issues with overspends or that sort of thing. So like Director Grove said, Divvy does allow smaller secondary budgets to be created, which really gives us that richer tracking on side programs or things that may not be appropriate for a general ledger item, but that we do want to have a pulse on. All receipts are stored electronically in the Divvy system and are reviewed by at least 2 people. One is the accounting and finance manager, and then the second is the manager of the person who made the charge. And the third and final review of all credit card charges is with the Board of Trustees in the monthly credit card detail report that you see. Any other questions or discussions on money going out with the Divvy card?
Madam Chair, an additional piece that's very useful in Divvy is the ability for Emma to create budgets for grants. And so if we get a grant, when we make those purchases for executing the grant, we can allocate it to be a supported budget line, and it then pulls directly from that. So if we have monies that come in throughout the fiscal year, we can properly allocate those in real time, and we don't have to do that at the end of the year to make those line up. So it allows us to work on the budget throughout the year versus trying to refigure out all of the information 12 months after the fact.
Yeah, I think real time is a real benefit that the library district has with the systems that are in place here. I was highly impressed when I saw them coming from a place that was still using a green screen. So real benefit that the library has. Okay, the last and final way that vendor payments can go out are through direct bill vendor remittances. And we do this as minimally as possible, generally for utilities, bills that have to be turned around pretty quickly and are really important, like our health insurance vendor bills, credit card processing fees that are required to auto draft, bank fees that are required to auto draft, and then a couple of vendors that do require an automatic payment. All of these bills are reviewed by an admin manager, such as the director, assistant director, myself, HR manager, etc. And that is the report in your monthly packet called the electronic bill payment list. Any questions?
So when you are talking about credit card processing fees, that's someone paying us with a credit card and then that. fees, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we get all of the credit card payments remitted to us, but then we get docked our portion of the processing fees.
Looks like no additional questions on that one. So,
Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you.
thank you. Anything else on this item? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I just want to say thank you to Emma. She's been very helpful in answering questions that I have as treasurer, because there are a lot of bills and there is a cycle. We're talking about, what happens at the end of the year if we haven't spent some money and if you look at our finances year over year, you'll see certain funds are really picked up at certain times of the year. I think about the summer program right before that ramps up some programming spending. And it's been really helpful to have the information that you provide. I really appreciate that. And then this is just a comment for Nick. I appreciate the careful consideration of if we can do it in this fiscal year, let's do it. So for example, the technology we purchased last year was really, really a good buy at the time. And it allows us to free up some funds for things like the air conditioner or the garage door, or, I worry about the bookmobile, things like that we know that have to be addressed and are going to be big ticket items if we don't address them sooner rather than later. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Laura. Other comments?
I have one more
Oh,
comment.
please.
I also want to be really clear with our finances that these finances can be found on MLD.org under the About Us tab. You go to updates and docs and there's financials and reports and they're there. You can go back and see what's happened up until each board meeting. And so that's really important. And I say that because there's been some concern expressed that we're not upfront about our finances, and that's not accurate at all. We're very upfront and transparent about how we spend money, when we spend money, where it goes, where it comes from, and with our budgeting process. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you, Laura, and I appreciate that comment, and I appreciate letting folks know exactly where they can find that information at any time. Thank you. Anything further? All right, then, we will carry on to item number 7 on our agenda, the director updates. We did have the written report from Director Grove as well as the departmental reports in our packet.
All right, thank you. I will try to keep it brief because we are already at 5 to 8, so I will keep everything pretty short this month. We officially opened Orchard Park in the month of May. So on May 1st, we opened Orchard Park. That has gone amazingly well. We're extremely excited about that. Some of the initial admin updates that I'll just kind of briefly go over. Getting ready for summer reading is one of the biggest things that a public library does every year. So working on the program calendar, we redid it this month a little bit to be month by month. So that has been a little bumpy, but we had the rollout of the June one, and our digital signage is being updated so that we have some consistency across all the branches. And the human resources has continued to be very busy. They had 2 job openings, 43 applications reviewed, and 16 interviews in the month of May. The foundation had a few updates. Their gala in May went very, very well. It was the first event that they'd had of that nature. They had 80 guests, and they were able to host that at Orchard Park to celebrate the fact that they had raised or have raised over $500,000 to support the opening of the Orchard Park branch. Our capital projects. So we, as I said, we opened Orchard Park on May 1st. The community has already taken ownership of that branch in so many ways. I heard in the first week, several people, both at the branch and when I was out in the community, that they are so excited to have their library open and that they can't wait to go to their library. So it is already very well received in our community, and especially in that part of our community. As I said earlier, tenant improvements, I've been saying this for a while, but we're waiting on these back-ordered items, and we can't fully close out the project until those items arrive. And they're just some complicated pieces that we don't have a solid timeline of when they'll be in. They just have told us they'll be here soon. So we're hoping that is very soon, because I would really like to see just those last like 3 or 4 items installed and done with there. We continue to meet with Brighton and CM Company. We've begun to outline the terms of that project, and hopefully we'll have something to bring in front of you soon to solidify the timeline and scope of that project. I don't know if you've noticed, but the potholes on Leisure Lane for our portion of Leisure Lane have been patched. We did not do a full recoding of the street yet. We are going to patch and keep patching until we have a facilities, an updated facilities plan and a plan for the renovation of Cherry Lane. More likely than not, it's going to have a major impact on that portion of the road when we do the renovation. And so we will do a full address of that portion of the private road of Leisure Lane at that time. And so until that happens, we will monitor any of the holes, potholes, and make sure that they are patched as we can get somebody to come out and do them. It's not high priority for many of these companies to come out and do those small projects. So it can take a little time to get somebody out here. Material services, they've been extraordinarily busy in ordering supplies, but also working with the branches to keep things on the shelf at Orchard Park. We have had to move items from the other branches to make sure that we have enough items for people to browse when they go to Orchard Park, because the patrons are excited to check things out, and that empties the shelves very quickly. So they're doing their best to keep those shelves moderately full. This goes over some of the usage of our computers and our network. We continue to have thousands of users every month. If you look at how many items we added just shy of 4,000 items last month. For context, we have 2 collection development librarians, 2 resource coordinators, and 1 resource specialist that handle all of those incoming and with the weeded materials, outgoing materials. So lots and lots of materials that they are working with every single month. And we had 130 patron initiated requests. And so those are requests that patrons put in for us to purchase and add to the collection. Our circulation stats have gone up year to year, year to date, sorry. Thank you. And it's great to see those numbers rebounding and starting to really skyrocket. I think, we'll see some larger numbers as we go from here until this time next year. Due to Orchard Park opening, it's going to skew some of the numbers a little bit, but overall, it's really great to see those numbers continuing to go up each month and year over year. Same with door count, and unlike door count and checkout, 3D prints have really been taking off at Unbound. They are constantly running all of their machines, so it's great. And getting back out into the community for our outreach events. We had been hampered for the last few years due to restrictions either on our end or our partners' end, and those have largely been lifted, and we are able to really get back out into the community to do those outreach events. And you'll see that again with all of the programs. Those numbers in green for percentage from last year to this year is extremely significant. If you've stopped by at any of our locations during a story time hour, you'll know that our facilities are very well used and the programs are extremely well attended. And let's see, that is all. I want to try and keep it fairly brief. So,
Questions, comments from the trustees?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Laura.
Nick, I appreciate the information. I know that people vote with their feet, and you can see that in our numbers. I'm excited to see this time next year after we have some stabilization. We've been very, very busy. I guess my one question is, how come we had a drop, and what do you attribute the drop in questions answered to?
I don't know that I have an exact
That's
answer on
okay. I'm
that.
just curious.
I would love to be able to say that it's because we have better signage and that people are able to navigate and find things better, but it's one of those that's very
Don't really know.
mercurial,
No,
and so it's hard to pin down.
No, I love the numbers. I do want to express my sympathy.
Edgar. That's a bummer. He was a good lizard. She was a good lizard. I apologize.
She was very well loved. It has been a talking point amongst us on library pets, and we do understand and mourn the loss of Edgar and what she meant to the Silverstone branch.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Josh.
I'd just like to point out Edgar was not eligible for Percy to begin with. So made the ultimate sacrifice there. Nick, I do have one. It's a very small, kind of in the weeds question about the collection development policy. A very important patron would spin my ear off, and she happens to share my last name, so it's kind of important to me to bring up. As items are weeded out, the situation came about where a book was on our shelf that was like a volume 2 of a series, and the volume 1, I suspect, had probably been weeded out, and it was probably, as the cycle of things go, do the collection development librarians have an eye towards that very particular, like, hey, if we have a volume 2 on the shelf that was checked out maybe more recently, but the volume 1 hasn't been checked out, maybe we kind of kick this can down the road for a month or until the volume 2 comes up to be on the weeded out schedule for that kind of scenario? Does that happen?
That is an excellent question, and one that not everyone agrees on in terms of philosophy of how to do that. It varies by library, but it is my personal opinion that we should be doing more to keep those collections intact whenever possible, and we have begun to address that, but it is going to be a slow-moving train to be able to do that consistently, because it can be very difficult with certain collections to know like which ones are part of a series or one of the biggest challenges is when you have a branch system, if you have the entire collection and it's spread out throughout, you have volume 1 and 3 at this location and volume 2 and 4 at that location. And that in essence mean that we have the entire collection, or even more broadly, that because we're part of the Links Library Consortium, we may have one, and to get book 4, you have to get it from CUNA or NAMPA. I think that there's some finessing of how we do that, though, where we can be a little more cognizant of keeping collections whole, simply for browsability and expectations for a patron when they come in. But like I said, that is not necessarily how things have been done, but it's something that I would aspire to do as we go forward.
For what it's worth, as a library director, I think that your view on as far as like, should probably carry more weight. And please don't hesitate to pass that along to the staff.
We'll do. Like I said, it's one of those that's a slow process to reverse. But we're definitely, it's something that I've been talking to staff about for the last few months, because I've had some of those same concerns.
Thank you.
Well, Nick, I also appreciate the inclusion of the statistics. I saw that checkout number of 125,000 items. Staggering, just an absolutely staggering number. If we were to average that monthly, we'd be at $1.5 million checkout a year, 1.5 million a year, which is an unbelievable number. So I think we had some pent up demand with Orchard Park, and we look forward to 2 million items a year when South Branch opens. But I'm interested to see how that happens. Of course, we would expect over the summer those numbers to go higher, but so probably not reliable to just extrapolate that out to 12 months, but still
A really fantastic number to see everybody reading and.
If you
going
could
to
just tell my
programs.
children that they don't have to be the ones to get us to that 200
Personally
or 2 million mark,
contributed
like
number.
that would be great. Make my carrying of bags a lot lighter. So
Any other questions?
1,000 new cards. In
Yeah.
May. Was that big on Orchard Park or?
it was very big.
Okay.
That first morning, right after we did the plaque dedication, there was a line of patrons waiting to get their cards. The first patron to, I believe, get a card, if I recall, this has been a little while, but was a teenager that was there with her dad, and they signed her up for a card. And I believe she was the first patron to get a library card that day upon opening.
I mean, that alone is a testament to the power of branches throughout the community. I mean, people that didn't have a card before and now they do.
And one thing that we have done in the years past, but it's very tedious and difficult to do, but I'm committed to doing it at some point in the next year, is doing a heat map of card holders in relation to our facilities. When we did that last in, I think, 2017 or so, you saw big numbers close to Silverstone and close to Cherry Lane, and spread throughout the community, but the high density rate was within a mile of, or a mile and a half of each location. So.
Well, I could talk good news all night, but we will carry on to item number 8 on our agenda. As I mentioned at the top of the meeting, the resources coordinator job description update appeared to be missing from our packet. Since the board has not had the opportunity to review that, we're going to table that particular item. But we do have the collection development librarian, the library director, and the recruitment coordinator positions included in our packets for review, as well as the associated salary schedule reflecting those positions. You have comments?
So the collection development librarian and the library director, those positions are really the only reason these ones are predominantly here in action items versus consent item is because there are changes, but the changes are mostly associated with trying to get some consistency in how we write the job descriptions across all job descriptions. And so for the foreseeable future, most things are going to be in this action item area for some of that cleanup and consistency. And then the recruitment coordinator is a position that we've created, and we'll be vacating another position to fill that. We had attempted to hire a human resource assistant in addition to our human resources manager and our human resources coordinator to do some of the scheduling and onboarding and things like that. That position proved difficult to fill with the candidates that we were wanting to be able to get in there. And so instead we looked at how we could tackle that issue differently. And we created the recruitment coordinator. This will allow us to move the volunteer coordinator position into the recruitment coordinator, and it streamlines employee and volunteer recruitment and onboarding processes. And the salary schedule reflects the changes with the positions.
So the position that's being vacated is the volunteer coordinator position? Is that
Correct.
Okay. Very good. Questions on the blank on a word. I'll call it amended job descriptions and the salary schedule.
Madam Chair, I have a couple questions.
Sure, go ahead.
On the library director, one of the things that's listed is that the library on the board on the library director job description is that serves as secretariat of the trustees, and then also in the board bylaws, it talks about how the director is also clerk of the board. I'm wondering, are those two things considered synonymous? Or are they separate duties? Because I'm wondering if that should be added to.
That's a great question. I've gone rounds on that in another bylaws meeting with a different entity recently, and in state code, it's listed as having those two separate functions, but you can allocate one and not allocate the
The other.
other.
You can't
So you
allocate
can't-
secretary, but you can allocate clerk of board.
Correct. And so you could have that in. I think that would definitely be doable. There was a few other modifications from a language standpoint that I caught through reading it this afternoon that also, if you're going to make any amendments, I would to that one, I would say that we make just a few minor modifications to that as well. They're not significant to the job description itself, but they are in line with cleaning up the consistency in how we talk about things. There's two instances in the job description that says board versus trustees. And cleaning those two areas up. And let me grab my other document just to make sure that I highlighted the right one. But if you're going to make that
I am going to.
clerk change, then I would advocate that you change the board, which is in the records and reports section, the last paragraph on page 1. It is also present under the board section on page 2, and then adding in the assistant director, and for flexibility, putting assistant directors under the supervisory responsibility section on page 3.
So just to restate what you just said, so on page 1, prepares regular reports for the trustees rather than board.
Correct.
And that's just a question of consistency, so we use the same word throughout.
Correct.
So under relationships, working relationships with the public, common trustees and board of. And then,
Supervisory responsibilities on page 3.
I'm going to come back to that in a
Okay.
second. So Laura, you want to make the amendment under the board item to serve as secretary of the trustees and clerk of the board?
Yes, please.
So we'd have serve as secretary.
I would, it serves as secretary of the trustees and clerk of the board, comma, and attends all board meetings as a non-voting
And that clerk of the board reflects the state code and reflects what's in our bylaws as well. And that's around the election process. Okay, and then supervisory responsibility.
Yes, we don't have assistant director listed.
So
under that.
supervises managers, administrative support staff. Is that clear for everybody on what those changes are?
And then, Madam Chair, I have one more question. This is really minute, but I'm just curious why bilingual, preferably Russian English.
We've had that in all of our job descriptions for a long time, and that is a reflection of the two primary non-English languages in our community.
Thank you.
All right,
Madam Chair?
go ahead, Josh.
It's a very minor change to this job description, but they're saying that, if you love what you're doing, you never work a day in your life. But hours are quantified, and I would hazard a guess and say that Nick probably routinely works more than 40 hours a week. Is that a true statement, Nick?
Sure.
Considering time
Yeah,
spent preparing
I
for
do.
meetings and advocating on our behalf and everything that you do. So
Yes.
on page 4, I would recommend that we strike those words and that may occasionally and replace them and with more routinely. Just to set expectations in the future if Nick goes on to bigger, less awesome things than he's about to be doing here. Just to prepare the next potential candidate for the realities of the situation, of the work hour commitment required to be the director.
So I would just caution that as a written expectation within the job description, even though it is salary and exempt, it can, the potential of trouble with how the legalities of that would be. I would want that to be specifically reviewed by the employment attorney before you all took action on that, if it were to be written that way, because it could be in violation of how job descriptions can be written and what expectations can be set. So I don't know that to be true, but I would just caution that we would want to tread carefully.
I obviously don't want to violate
not-
law, but I
not-
also
not-
want to manage expectations.
not-
And
not-
I don't think it's realistic.
Not for myself, but for.
I honestly don't
So,
think that that's a realistic, anyone who's applying for this position in the
Yeah.
future would certainly know it, but I think that's false and misleading to any member of the public that looks at job description. Oh, he may occasionally work more than 40 hours a week, and we're paying him, this much on salary schedule, which kind of brings up to mind another point. I would like the salary schedule to be published on our website with the audit reports, or I don't see the harm in that, and I think that would be a good thing as far as government transparency and that sort of thing.
Okay, so.
Any thoughts? Okay.
So I think the publication of the salary schedule, I think we would have a separate discussion as opposed to one
Okay,
part of
yeah.
this item, so we can consider that under our future agenda items, the pros and cons of doing that. And I'd like our HR person to weigh in on that as
Fair
well.
enough.
I'm very
Absolutely.
interested in transparency, but I'd like to get the feedback from her as well, and I can see Emma making. So, and then to Nick's point on that language, it just reads to me like very specific employment lawyer language. So I also would want to, I've seen that in my
Okay.
own job description. So I would just want to make sure I
Fair enough. Fair enough.
100% understand what you're saying. And I know what kind of hours Nick puts in and what kind of hours the previous director and the director before that put in as well. So you're 100% correct. I just don't want to step on a landmine, and she may be able to suggest some language that both meets the legal requirements and establishes the appropriate expectations. So I would move forward with the changes that we've already discussed, and then note
Table
that
this
we will
one.
have it reviewed and bring it back
Fair enough.
for that
Thank you.
item.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead. Lisa.
would the point at which we bring that back for discussion be the appropriate time to talk about a potential change to that language, or would now be the appropriate time to do that?
I think you can go ahead and suggest it.
That's
but we
probably a
won't-
convoluted question.
Yeah, we won't act on it at this.
Okay, so just to present another perspective on that, I think we've all had jobs that feel like so much a part of who we are, that we just do those jobs all the time. But I like the language occasionally work over 40 hours, because I do think we should be, have an expectation that folks have an appropriate work-life balance. And I know that sometimes the advocacy that Nick does, and probably the work that he does just in his mind, right, while he's going about his off work time, it just feels like a part of who he is, and I understand that. But I also think that we really should be stressing that work-life balance, because otherwise we really burn people out. And then if Nick was ever in a position where he just felt like he was doing too much and he needed to set a boundary, I think he should be able to do that and use the language in his job description to say, okay, this says occasionally over 40 hours, and I've been working 60 hours for 6 months. I need, and then he can just point to that to say, this wasn't my expectation when I took this work, and I need a break, or I need another, assistant manager. I need something else. And I think that's really important as a protection for the person who's willing to do this work. And my thought on the salary schedule is that we're doing okay, I think, as long as we're at least trying to kind of hit midpoint on that salary schedule for folks, and not, starting with the minimum. That's just my philosophy on, taking care of your people. But also I think, as somebody who has like home responsibilities, that the salary isn't so much that we should expect consistent working over 40 hours a week. So I would just encourage language to say it the way it is. That way the director has protections, and has something to point to when he points out maybe some structural issues. If he's consistently working 60 hours a week, then we have a bigger problem, right? Like, we don't have enough staff. We've got to fix something, because we shouldn't be burning our people out like that. So sorry for rambling, but that's me.
I appreciate those comments, Destiny, and burnout is important for us to avoid for Nick and as well as our other staff, because it does not serve our interest to replace directors often. So good comments, and I think that component will get some feedback from our employment lawyer. We'll get some feedback from HR, and we will bring that back for discussion in the future. So coming back to what we have, do you want to weigh in on that?
I was just
point?
going to ask, are we going to motion these separately? Is that the expectation? The way it's written, that's what I would think. Okay.
Maybe not in behind. Okay. Great. So any further comments before we move forward to action? So we have the first action item here is the collection, development, library, and job description.
I move to approve the collection, development, librarian job description.
Thank you, Laura.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the library director. I would note for the maker of the motion that it would include the edits that we discussed.
I move to approve the library director job description with the edits as discussed.
Thank you, Laura.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the next item, the new job description, the recruitment coordinator.
I move that we approve the recruitment coordinator job description as presented.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Destiny. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And that brings us to the final item under number 8, the salary schedule. This matches up with the job descriptions that we just approved.
I move that we approve the salary schedule as presented.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Josh. Further comment? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 9 on our agenda, policy reviews. As the board is aware, we periodically review all of our policies on somewhat of a regular schedule, as the other business of the board allows. So the policy we have before us tonight is the lending guideline policy. This was included in your packet in both red line and clean version so that the changes are obvious. Comments here, Nick?
A lot of changes to this. Some just formalities, and then a few trying to get some more clarity. I wouldn't be surprised if we do similar to what we did with the director position, and make, if you all have some additional edits or changes, including those in your motion. But one of the things specifically to this is making sure that we are tying some of our policies, when applicable, to Idaho code, and showing where what we do is codified the way that it is. And so looking at Idaho code 332701 to promote the establishment and development of public library service for all the people of Idaho, and making sure that that's at the top of this lending guideline policy. Some of the other changes that we put in here were to clarify and also just update some of the, like I said, language that was used, and have it consistent with other documents and with the agreements that we have in place with the Links Consortium, and to make clear what and how patrons are able to check out items from our libraries. Also to talk about the use of the collection agency to recover the cost of lost items. We do not charge overdue fees, but we do charge for replacement of lost or damaged items. And if those do go unpaid for an extended period of time, we utilize a third-party service to help us recoup some of those costs.
Thank you, Nick. Questions from the trustees on the policy? Go ahead, Trustee.
Director Grove, under obtaining a library card, am I reading it correctly that previously a minor could obtain a library card, and then there's a period of time in which their parent needs to approve that in order for them to keep using the card? But with this change, a parent or legal guardian must obtain the card for the minor, so they can no longer do it on their own?
Correct. There was, in how the policy was written and how the policy was interpreted were two different things. And so one of the issues was that the policy was vague in what that process needed to look like for a minor to be able to get a card. And so the practice had been to issue a card to a minor 14 or older with a picture ID, and a postcard would be sent to the parent. And if the parent approved, then it would become a full card. Otherwise, it would not become a fully usable card at that point. And so really trying to establish clear instructions for staff on what they are expected to do and how they're supposed to carry out the policy from the board.
So regardless, this would have applied to 14 and up. So it's a 10-year-old, I couldn't come in and get a library card, and then
Correct. But
regardless, I would have to have a parent or guardian with me?
that is where that vagueness was in the policy, but the standard operating procedure had been to do that, but that was due to the vagueness of the policy as written. And so whatever the board chooses to do, I would only ask that we have very clear instructions on what that is, so that we're not to interpret the intent of the policy in executing and providing those cards.
So then I guess I would suggest that this policy be more specific about ages, because I don't see that mentioned at all. So if I'm 14 and I come in and I want a library card at this point, it's accepted. I could not have one unless my parent was with me.
Correct. Because
What if I called my parents and over the phone they said it's okay?
we would need them to be there to do that, because they, as it is written here with these changes, they are responsible for the activity on the card in terms of if an item is lost, stolen, what have you, damage, the parent legal guardian is ultimately responsible. And in years past, I would probably have argued very strongly that we need to do whatever we can to, you know, increase the ability for autonomy in those that age group. However, based on where we're at culturally, that would not be my advisement. But if we do anything under the age of 18, that we would need to look at how that could be written, where staff have clear guidelines on exactly how to do what they're allowed to and instructed to do.
So I understand the need for that, maybe from like a legal financial perspective, right? Because you don't want for your kid to sign up for something that you're legally responsible for and then come to find out later that you owe, money because they damaged a book. But my concern is that it would disadvantage populations that are already pretty disadvantaged in a lot of ways in our community, like kids who maybe don't have parents who are involved and wouldn't necessarily mind the child being independent in the library and choosing their own material. But maybe they work 2 jobs and they can't get there. Maybe it's not a priority for them to show up to the library with their child. Maybe they themselves don't see the value in that. But I think for specifically those kids who might not have the support either intentionally or unintentionally at home, the library is a really, really important community resource for them. So I wonder if there's a way, maybe it's not realistic, but I wonder if there's a way, or maybe another library district has done this successfully. Maybe somebody's got magic language that really allows kids to, and I understand they could still come to the library, and have this be a space for them and look at books on the premises.
So unfortunately, more Idaho libraries are instituting library card for minor policies and creating more restrictions, not less. My natural inclination would be to advocate for doing exactly what you describe and for the exact same reasons. But I don't know where y'all want to take it, but as far as how the rewrite that we have and why is to, I guess, safeguard the district from the loud concerns of the citizenry in Meridian and throughout Idaho.
Well, thank you, Director Grove and Destiny. I hear your concerns, and especially when in my mind I translated into a 17-and-a-half-year-old and whether they could obtain a library card. This is a person who's likely pretty independent. They're driving, they're working, they're doing lots of things. Right, it does seem to put up a barrier for that person, and just balancing with the position that the library has taken is that parents get to make choices for their families, and just trying to balance that, what is good library practice, what has historically been library practice is to lower barriers for people being able to access materials. And you're spot on, not everybody has a stay-at-home parent or a parent who's off on the weekends and can come in and get a library card and all of those kinds of things. But just balancing that with the desire of parents to be in the driver's seat around materials, right? And it's a pickle, it's a difficult needle to thread. Because you can imagine, high school students have the ability to do lots of things fairly independently, and we don't want to put up barriers at the library. I don't have the answer on that, but I appreciate your concerns there. I always am interested in the data, right? How many, and we can't count the people that don't come in, right? Because you can't, you can only count people that are getting library cards with their parents, but the people who are not coming through the door because they don't have a parent to come in and get them a library card, we have no way of counting those folks. So it's hard to estimate how many folks are impacted by this.
Well, and I think philosophically, we've had conversations, I think, in American society about how much limiting of freedom we're willing to do in exchange for safety. And this to me feels a lot like that issue. And I think, you know, I understand the legal and financial aspect, because as a parent, I would be furious if my kids got me into a situation where now I owe money because I didn't know that they checked out this book and then threw it in the swimming pool, right? But I just think as we're making these decisions, and I know that this board is well aware, and I think this weighs heavy on all of us, but when we're talking about exchanging freedom for safety, it needs to be a really thoughtful conversation. And I hope that just as a community, we're engaging in those conversations in a really honest way, because this type of thing translates to exchanging other freedoms for perceived safety as Americans. And that's not a road that I want to go down as an American citizen. So just to be reflective of that in our decision making.
Appreciate that.
Madam Chair, Director Grove.
Go ahead, Laura.
There's a suggestion I would make to the policy, and this goes back to this very issue of exchanging freedom for safety. One of the things that there's a perception out there, whether we like it or not, it's out there, that among a certain portion of our population is that there's no safeguards in place. And that's not true at all. But our policy doesn't necessarily reflect this. So where it talks about the parent or legal guardian is financially responsible for the account of the minor, also the parent or guardian is also responsible to monitor their children's checkouts. I'd like to see that reflected in the policy. We do care about our patrons' use and making sure we are helping patrons choose the best book for them. That's why we have a children's section. That's why we have a teenage section. That's why we have an adult section. But I'm wondering if we can add something along those lines that says, you know, the parent or legal guardian is financially responsible for the account of the minor and is also responsible for the content or the resources they check out in terms of making it, you know, an appropriate fit for their family along those lines. That's what I would like to see right now. In the future, and again, this goes back to the data that we're wondering about is I'm wondering what other tools we can use to help patrons understand how we do support their use of the library. Whether it's, is there a way to, have an option for patrons that what if they sign up their, create a library card account for their children, can we automatically send an email every time that account is used? And the account was used on this date, and here's what was checked out. Is there a way to support that? I don't know. I'd like to look to see is that what other libraries are doing, library systems are doing, and is that something we can do? I'm not in favor of, and I want to be very clear about this. I'm not in favor of restricted sections. I'm not in favor of other parents or groups choosing or making choices for families about what they deem appropriate. I'm not in favor of anything that violates the First Amendment, including restricting access based on religion, race, or sexual orientation. But I am in favor of tools that might help parents understand how the library works and what their responsibility is when they create an account for their child. Because I am going to be very honest. I'm very afraid of future legislative sessions and the amount of time that we've had to spend, and especially Nick and
our directorate and board president in terms of meeting with and convincing other policymakers that we do have safeguards in place. I'd like to see that reflected in our policy. So something to consider down the line. Again, I don't want this right now, but some research I'd like to see and is you know, if we do have, you know, Idaho Falls, the tiered checkout. I don't like how they did it. I don't like the fact that they said, oh, we're going to resend all the cards and you have to come in. But if we could, moving forward, offer an option that was somewhat tiered, is that a possibility? And what would that take? What would the implications be for interlibrary loan? For example, our library system classifies certain books one way. Another neighboring library system classifies books the same title a different way. Like, how do you address that? Those are some barriers we have to address. But you know, even just the email, like, hey, if you get your, you know, when you sign your child up for a library card, you're going to get an email that says this is what was checked out. So we're not going to monitor that, but we'll help you monitor that. Something along the lines that we could do for that. You know, I'm really interested to see what happens with Idaho Falls in the next several months and if we can get some information. I do believe we need to show an effort that we do value what our patrons are saying. And they're saying that we don't want a group to make a decision for us. For me as a family, I don't want somebody to make that decision for me. I want to be able to make that decision myself. That's what I heard over and over again. So how can we help our patrons understand the tools that are available to them to help make better decisions when selecting books for their family or helping their children?
Thank you, Laura. Please go ahead.
So in the policy as written with the red line version, there is a section on page 2 that does talk about how parents and legal guardians are encouraged to actively participate in their children's library lending activity and have the ability to view currently checked out.
Right.
In terms of what you're saying about email, I don't know what is possible and not possible within the system that we participate, that we use in the Links Consortium. Some of the things that we want to do are limited by what is capable in that system. Some things can be added if the feature is not already there in the system to do something this or any other request. If it is doable and not there, it still could cost $20,000 or more to have them code it in and make it available.
Could we
and so
find
it depends
out?
on what exactly it is. But if it's just emailing what has been checked out, I can look into it, but it might take a couple of months.
And that's okay. I'm not expecting a change
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
In terms of the parent information, I would recommend that come much earlier in the policy. Again, because people tend to pay attention to what, you know, most people aren't going to read through this whole document. I'd like to see that earlier, just to establish right up front that, hey, this is how we roll. And I think that would be an appropriate paragraph between the second paragraph and obtaining a library card. I would make that recommendation or an edit.
Thank you, Laura. I think it's important to retain sight of overwhelmingly what our patrons have expressed, right? We were all witness to the hearing in Ada County, and overwhelmingly our parents, our patrons were clear that they are comfortable making decisions and handling, you know, the materials that their children have access to. So there is not this the majority of our patients are not asking for restrictions on cards, right? That if anything, totally the opposite. So I think we need to be thoughtful, as Destiny pointed out, of those trade-offs in restrictions and freedoms. And we need to be thoughtful in those costs of trade-offs, right? To implement a restricted card and say, you can only check out materials out of the children's section. Well, that 17-and-a-half-year-old I was talking about
No, absolutely.
has there's no value in that restricted card. And the 8-year-old is unlikely to be at the library without their parent. So who is that restricted card for is my question. And it is a sincere one, not a flippant one. Right.
Absolutely.
When we're talking about the, limiting to the children's section, we were talking about children who are probably not at the library on their own. So if we invested some significant dollars in modifying our system, are we meeting a need that really exists? And it's a question and not an answer.
Right. Madam Chair, may I respond?
Sure.
And my concern about that is we have an opportunity to, because again, I do believe this is going to come up again. It's not going to go away. We have an opportunity to show our public and our policymakers at the state level that we do and have made a concerted effort to address their concerns. I would hate that it would cost $20,000 to change a code that sends an email to let people know that their kid checked out a book. But at the same time, if we can say, hey, there's no reason why your child, you shouldn't ever know what your child is checking out. We have made this effort. I think that might be a better investment than the idea that we might possibly have to close library access to unaccompanied minors, which
Absolutely.
is an option that was presented, and I'm concerned about that.
I share those
I feel like
concerns.
it's which is the least crappy option. Sorry for that, but
I share those concerns, and I think that there are also other avenues, right? We've seen in other places around the country the pushback at the court level that making restrictions on First Amendment rights is not going to fly. So I don't agree that it's necessarily a foregone conclusion that these laws could be implemented. And I would also point out that the tools that we had for parents to monitor what their kids were checking out, and please correct me, Director Grove, if I'm wrong, existed long before the concerned citizens showed up at our door, right? We have operated for nearly 100 years very successfully. And these tools that we had for parents to monitor what their kids are checking out, to be aware, to check on the kids' accounts, were not in response to the concerned citizens or legislative actions. Those were in place before, and they worked really well, and they continue to work really well. So I want to keep my focus on what's actually happening at the library. I think Mayor Simison and his State of the City put it really well. The manufacturing issues for us to respond to, I don't think we need to panic about that. I think we need to kind of take that step back and keep focused on how the library actually operates.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
I would be interested in knowing whether the current system can do that, as far as sending emails, and what the capabilities are, and then how much it would cost to build that into the platform if we needed to do that. Not so that we can take that step, but so that when inevitably this issue comes back up, we can point to the massive cost of what they're potentially going to ask us to do. And, I think as stewards of taxpayer money, we would have a responsibility to make sure that those costs are incurred because of real problems and not manufactured ones. I think the taxpayers expect us not to listen to a small group of folks and say, hey, this is, it's their opinion that this is a problem, and so we're going to go ahead and spend $20,000 to fix it when it was never a problem to begin with. Because I know that, in modern rhetoric, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between a fact and an opinion, but there are facts, they exist, and then and their opinions. And I think that most reasonable people can agree on what is a fact. And it is a fact that this has not been an issue until very recently, because of scenarios that were manufactured by a small group of people who have a political and social agenda that the rest of the community doesn't share. And so I'm interested in knowing that information, just so that in the course of our advocacy as trustees, we can say, hey, you know, I understand that this is something that you're considering, but here's the cost, right? To that. And, you know, any unit of small government is not usually a fan of an unfunded mandate. So maybe they can find the money for us to make changes that they are, that they're asking for. And then another thing, I understand the urge to take on this issue before we're told to do it, right? But I feel very strongly that no matter what we do now, they will ask for 5 steps more, because at the end of the day, I don't know that the underlying goal here is to protect children. I think the underlying goal here is to wage a war against folks who live differently, look differently, love differently than the majority. And so when societies and groups of people, I think, are faced with these types of restrictions and this type of culture, I think that preemptive compliance has never in history been a good idea, and it's never ended well. So for me, I understand the legal financial piece. That's the piece that makes perfect sense to me, and I don't know the answer to that. But my gut feeling is to hold out on and preserve freedom over perceived and I think incorrect notions of danger at a public library. So, but I've got a criticism with no solution, so I don't know where to go from there. But I think just as a philosophy, we should not rush into anything that. And I wonder if on this, you know, can we, if this is something that we have to do, and I trust when Nick tells me that this is something that kind of folks are doing, is there a way to work in, I mean, if you do in fact show up with your minor to get a library card, and you check the box and you say that they can have this library card and access to all of the things that come with having a library card, that you know, it was your responsibility. You said yes, you checked the box, knowing full well what your child would have access to, potentially, if they were to go against your wishes and leave the section that you know, per your family want them in. So I wonder if we could use that opportunity. If it has to be in there, can we use the opportunity to put more protections in place for the library district and for the folks who use the library who don't want to see these restrictions? Because I think parents did very much state that they feel comfortable making the decisions for their children, but that is not the same thing as helicoptering their children, right? Like the decision is literally to let them choose and to monitor at home, right? It was not to create barriers.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Laura.
Trustee Hart, I totally agree. I would rather err on the side of, or move to the side of education and full understanding of what the responsibility of having a library card entails for every user, including when I sign my child up for a library card. This is what would happen. In my background as an educator, I found that if we can provide opportunities for parents to get information instead of having to ask for it, we provide it for them. They're much more responsible and responsive, as opposed to, well, I didn't know. Because on one level, I think all parents should, like, you can check your child's grades, for example, anytime you want. But it's pretty easy to go in and say, I want a report sent home every week of my child's grades. That makes it easy and I don't have to check. It's one lift that helps me as a parent. So that's why it would be nice if if we can, I'm not suggesting we add that to this policy right now, but research the costs of what it would take for an email, for example, to be generated every time a minor uses their library card. I don't think it would be $20,000. I think the coding would be much less. But I think that would be a step to address some education for our patrons. Because in all honesty, I don't want to have to do what Idaho Falls is doing. I don't love that idea. I don't want to restrict access to the library, but I also feel like patrons, they have a responsibility and a right to know what their children are checking out. And in a perfect world, they would be able to ask their child and their child would be honest. But in real life, that unfortunately doesn't happen. So if we can facilitate some transparency just about what we do and at the education when you sign up for a card and what you can, these are the tools that are available to you. In fact, you can check this box and get this email. I think that would go a long way toward addressing some of the concerns that our policymakers are wondering about. Well, it's not, how hard can it be to help give parents one more tool? I don't think it's that hard, but I also don't want to restrict access to information. I don't love that the under 14 and up option went away, but I also understand why it is not there right now. And I just want to maintain as much access to our library as possible while also respecting as much of our community's wishes as possible. And I know it wasn't a lot of people, but there were people who said, I think about the working parents who said, I can't always be here to monitor what my child checks out. I understand that. If we could address some of that, that would be helpful for me personally.
Thank you, Laura. So to summarize a couple of things, we have, the board is asking the staff to do some research on costs. I think we need to consider the implications of the overall links system and moving down a little further in that obtaining a library card section of the policy. It talks about a card from a home library or from the Meridian Library. So a person could have a Meridian Library card and go check out a book at Boise. Is that correct, Nick? At the actual Boise branch.
Correct.
So
Additionally, to Laura's point earlier, not every library is going to have an item listed the same. And so if you have, let's say you live in Kuna. I don't know that it's still this way, but this is the first time I visited their library. Hank the Cowdog is a book designed for like 8 to 10-year-olds, and they had it shelved and listed in their teen section. So one library could have an item listed in the teen section, whereas every other library might have it in their juvenile children's section. So there can be inconsistencies based on preference of that library system that could, if utilized in a restricted manner, the way that some of these other libraries are going down and creating technology-based restrictions to limit access, the equity with which it's rolled out and implemented could be extremely different than what the intended purpose is, based on those contradictions and how items are shelved from one location to another, considering the fact that we are a part of a library consortium with neighboring cities, and we have the open access courier system, which allows those items to be brought in, but also allows people to go to those places and check out. So unintended consequences are numerous when you start putting in additional qualifications for an action.
So thank you for that, Nick. And so I think giving staff time to gather some of that information may not be July, maybe at a future meeting for for discussion. But and I think having not just Nick but some of the other staff weigh in on what the day-to-day on the ground in the library looks like. What are the implications of some of the things that we're talking about here? Costs in making it work in the system, operational changes, those kinds of things. And again, as I said earlier, balancing that out with who are we responding to here, right? Because I think, as Destiny rightly pointed out, folks were interested in not having materials in the library, period, not in how can I monitor what my kid is checking out, right? That was never the request that was made to us, right? The request made to us was restrict or remove these items, period. So it was not about monitoring my own family, it was about monitoring your family, which is a different and question altogether and not one that can be solved with our technology. But at any rate, I think doing our due diligence and having staff collect some of that information and think about some of those implications that we're not able to think about right here. What is before us today with this proposed change would prevent a high schooler from getting their own library card on their own, right? When we talk about children, we're not talking about elementary kids. I think in practice, we're talking about high school kids not being able to get their own cards without the presence of their parents, which, as Destiny pointed out, may not be as easy as it seems for some kids. That, to me, that's the most significant change that we're proposing in this policy. So options before us are to table this item for a future meeting, to bring it back with some additional changes, that maybe parses out high school kids versus elementary age kids, or to take action as it's presented. And also I would further add, if we did approve a policy tonight, there's nothing that prevents us from amending that policy in the future as we gather more information. So as I said, I don't have an answer. There's some competing interests here of parents wanting to be in the driver's seat around library materials and also a desire to not put up barriers, which is good library practice. That's historically been the direction that we've been in. So.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Destiny.
You didn't mention, but I wonder if this is possible to, if we were today to take action to approve this as it is, with the intention to do some information gathering and maybe come back to it later and do some edits. Is it possible at this point to, and I don't know what this would look like. This is probably also partially maybe a legal question, but along with the change that you have to have a parent with you to get a library card, can that be wrapped into, and then when your parent agrees to get you that library card, the library is no longer held responsible for the material? Like, can we say that just explicitly? And maybe that's a legal release they need to sign, but for me, it feels like we are putting up a barrier and not actually doing what this is intended to do, right? Which is ostensibly to protect parents from financial ruin when their children, destroy books, but also to show that we're allowing parents to actively make the decisions about so actively that they have to show up to the library to show their ID and sign a piece of paper to make decisions about what their children access. So if we're going to do that anyway, at the same time, can we not include some legal protection for the library? Because, we've all heard when folks show up in this room, they don't want an email to go to them every time their kid checks out a book. They don't. And the folks who showed up to defend the library didn't say, well, you know, I want to make decisions very actively about what my children are looking at in the form of an email, right? They didn't, literally nobody has asked for this. The intention is to remove the books. So if we're going to put a restriction in place, can we tie it into something that legally protects the library? Because we have had threats to be sued because we're allowing access to materials for other people's children that a certain group doesn't want them to have. So it feels like if we're going to make that trade, if we're going to sacrifice freedom, then we should be protected in that case. So maybe that's if this is going to take, this is going to be a legal question, right? Probably.
I think, Trustee Hart, it is a legal question. And when we talk about protecting us legally, right, I'm not sure what that means, right? Could somebody sue us, you know, under the current law? No, right? Can we waive applicability to some future law? Probably not, but I'm not a lawyer or a CPA, right? I can't answer any of these questions, so, but we can gather information.
I would echo that from, we could, you know, we have all of these policies reviewed by legal before bringing before the board, and we can ask that question. But the intent there would be to protect against future laws more than, because there's nothing in current laws that we would be at risk of as is written. And protecting against future laws is a fool's errand right now, just because we have no idea what that could mean or do or unravel in terms of what they pass. And so I would just caution against doing it for that purpose, not necessarily advising against doing any of those things, but to do it for that purpose, that might not be the most prudent way of making the change right now. So, but I can definitely ask that when we're having these reviewed.
And to respond, I agree with what you're saying. But it also feels like, you know, as part of this conversation, we have discussed the kind of political reasons, at least in part, for why this change is being requested. And I think that isn't that the same thing? Aren't we preparing for a law that doesn't exist yet? We're trying to protect against something that doesn't exist. So I think that, for me, feels like what we're already doing. So if we're going to do it, like, why not, you know,
Right.
make our intention clear that if this is the way this has to happen, then, you know, at that point, we're going to haul you in here to like sign for your kid to have a library card. You are going to agree that having that library card comes with all of the things that having access to a library comes with.
Mhm. I appreciate this discussion. I think it's a good one, and I think these are complex and meaty issues. So I would recommend / suggest that we table this item as we give further thought to some of the things that we've discussed here, as well as give staff an opportunity to gather some of that data, which would mean that our existing line policy would stay in place. There are aspects of the policy that need to be addressed with immediacy. We could do that next month and then address these kind of more philosophical questions or political questions in a future iteration of the policy. Right? We can, if we need to clarify something around the link system or anything, if that's okay. I think it requires some really careful thought. and some excellent considerations and issues have been brought forward tonight. I don't know if it's possible, even informally, but for staff to keep track of or estimate what we're talking about here, right? We issued 1,000 cards in a month. How many were kids getting cards without their parents? What are we talking about, right? You talked about our first Orchard Park card holder was a teen who was accompanied by her parent at that time. So
And Madam Chair, if I may, to add on to that, I think about, you know, the partnerships that schools are going to have and continue to have. I know Hawaii High School is excited to have a partnership with Orchard Park, and that speaks directly to this concern. So my understanding is that it's currently as written, or not as written, as practiced. Students, high school students have a certain amount of time, a couple of weeks, to get their parents to come and sign the permission slip, correct?
correct, they get
Okay.
a postcard as mailed out.
Okay.
Correct. A postcard is mailed to their
Mhm.
address.
So there's still that, it still happens. It's just a certain amount of time in which that happens.
Correct. Right, if the, as Nick pointed out, then that card is no longer valid, or not a full library card at that point, so. But as Director Grove pointed out, that's not spelled out clearly in the policy, so even if we were to keep our existing practice in place, it would be good to make that more clear in the policy.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
folks.
I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead, Laura.
I'd like to move that we approve the policy
With revisions as written, as presented. And then give the director and his staff time to research our questions. I do feel like we need to be clear for our staff and our practices, and this helps clarify that currently.
I'll say that.
Thank you, Josh. So we have a motion and a second to approve the policy as written. I will not be supporting the motion. I think I would like further time to consider the implication of removing the ability for our high school kids to get provisional cards. I know that's what we call them. It's clear in my mind. I don't have enough information at this point to make that change in policy that is proposed. Any further comment?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Josh.
just a question. As policies are approved or from this board, do they take effect immediately?
Typically,
Yes, unless there is a qualifying situation. Let's say it was something that would require implementation of a new service device or other accommodation to fully execute a policy. Otherwise, it goes into effect immediately. Rolling it out to staff can take time, but ostensibly, I can't say that word, it would be in effect starting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
so,
So this goes into that unintended consequences then, where the 17-and-a-half-year-old tomorrow cannot get that library card immediately.
correct.
Madam
So-
Chair?
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I would just, and just to further clarify, to be clear, I may be willing to support this change down the road as we have additional information available to us on what's happening operationally, what are the costs of some of the technology pieces. I just don't feel like I have enough information to change from our existing practice immediately. So go ahead, Dustin.
Madam Chair, I completely agree with what you just said, and I would just ask a question of Nick. So right now, if a 16-year-old came in, they got a library card, not that this is clear enough for anybody to understand that at this point, but say a 16-year-old came in, they got a library card, how long would their parents have
So
to?
they would be able to check out 2 items with that limited use card until the postcard had been returned. I believe it's 30 days since after sending it out, but I'm going to, is it 2 months? I don't have the specifics. I have not issued a card in a very long time, so I am not positive, but I can definitely follow up with that.
So then as a parent, I get this card and I sign it and just stick it back in the mail, or do I need to bring it in?
You have to bring it
I
in,
have to bring, so one way or another, I have to come
correct?
in. But if my child was being scandalous and getting a card against my wishes and then checking out 2 items, I mean, really, that's the most damage they could do without me having to take an additional step and come into the library. They can check out 2 items.
Correct.
Okay. With that in mind, I agree with Meg that I don't have enough information, but I also don't think parents are asking for this. And I would be interested to know how often parents come in and didn't realize their child checked out a book and then ruined it. And now they're on the hook for $40. Right? I mean, is that a problem? Are we creating a solution in search of a problem? So with that said, I would not support approving this at this time. I think we need more time.
Madam
So-
Chair.
Go ahead, Josh.
Just to, there's one thing that was kind of mentioned about having staff research, so we have hard data points on, the cost of to implement a change that maybe a minority of people would like, would be exorbitant, because we've already gone down this road and done the research and come up with this number that's going to be, whatever the number is, I don't really care. I would say that is an exercise in futility and a waste of time. If someone comes to me as an elected official and says, hey, look, I want to make this change, I'm not beholden to that person. I act with a clear conscience and a responsible heart, and don't have to answer to them. As there's one member of the community that's walked in here and said to each of us, you work for me. No, I represent the community and serve on this board. I'm not beholden to anyone. I am not required to justify my decisions. If the community is unhappy with the service I'm providing, I will not be reelected. And that's the way it works. I don't feel that the board should ever have, any board member should feel bullied into trying to justify things. A simple answer of no should suffice. And if you are not comfortable with that, tell them to contact Trustee Cummings. And I will be glad to tell them no.
I appreciate that feedback, Josh. As our hour grows late, I think I am going to call for the question at this point. So we have a motion and a second to approve the lending guideline policy revisions as presented to us in our packet. Since we expect a divided vote here, I'm going to do a roll call. Voting yes would approve the policy. Voting no would not approve the policy. And we would see this come back to us in the future. So, Trustee Cummings.
Aye.
Trustee Knudsen? Aye. Trustee Hart?
No.
Trustee Kohler?
No.
And I'm Trustee Larson, and I vote no. The motion dies. Motion fails. Yes. So we will bring this item back in a future meeting. That brings us to item number 10, executive session.
Can I make one request of the
Yes.
trustees? Individually and not in a group email, would you please email me proposed language that you would like me to research or incorporate? This is not going to, I can go ahead, 100% certainty will not be ready for you next month. But I can try to have it by August. But this is going to take some time, but as much clarity as you can help provide in terms of direction with some things that are important to you, that would be helpful for me to incorporate into the editing to bring forward to the entire board in the future.
Right, that brings us to item number 10 on our agenda, an executive session. So we have on our agenda to go into executive session. Executive sessions are permitted for specific purposes under the Idaho Code. No action is taken in executive session. Tonight, we will be going into executive session under Idaho Code 742061A to consider the evaluation, dismissal, disciplining of, or to hear complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent or public school student. And Idaho Code Section 742061C to acquire an interest in real property not owned by a public agency. We will roll call in. A vote yes is to go into executive session per the code sections I just listed. Trustee Cummings.
Yes.
Trustee Knudsen.
Yes.
Trustee Hart.
Yes.
Trustee Kohler.
Yes.
And I'm Megan Larson, and I vote yes. It is 9:25 and we are in executive session. All right, thank you. It is 10:02 and we are out of executive session, returning to our regular session. We have the final item on our agenda, which is our future agenda items. I am very excited for the July meeting. We will be discussing the budget draft for fiscal year 2024. Not the July meeting, but at a future meeting, we will reconsider the lending guidelines policy. Well, possibly at the July meeting if we have interim adjustments to make. Other items for consideration of board, the future meeting. Go ahead, Destiny.
Madam Chair, probably not for July because it sounds like we've got a full docket, but in August or September, if we could revisit what I mentioned in a previous meeting, which is that form, or changing the form or creating a new form so that folks can request a move of a book from one section to another.
Yes, I have done research on that. I forgot to mention that in my director update. I don't have any policy revisions ready to go, but I have been reviewing other libraries and how they have theirs written. So it might be ready by August, but that is also that typically. So we will. I will see how good we're how good to go we are on that, but we should have it relatively soon.
Thank you.
There's another policy that I've been reviewing that we do not have that we've at least alluded to in the past with a public comment policy. It's a common policy that I'm finding in a lot of larger library systems that I might be adapting and bringing forward to see if you all would like to implement that as well.
Any other items?
Madam Chair, just to
ahead.
reiterate the desire to get on the agenda for the payroll salary schedule publication possibility.
Thank you. All right. Should you think of anything else, of course, feel free to email me or Director Grove. Seeing nothing else, it is 10:05 and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Destiny, do you have